Princess Verlis was born under the blood-red skies of Skor Prime, a planet ruled by warriors. The Zkoran race valued strength above all else. A true Zkoran was expected to fight, to conquer, to prove themselves in battle. But Verlis was different. She was born crippled. Her spine was twisted at birth, making it impossible for her to stand tall like other Zkorans. She could not hold a sword properly, nor could she fight in the brutal combat trials that decided a warrior's worth. From the moment she took her first breath, the nobles of the empire whispered behind her back, "A weakling, a disgrace to the bloodline. She is not fit to be the daughter of the High Warlord." Her father, High Warlord Kravos, was the most powerful Zkoran alive. His name was feared across the stars. He had crushed entire planets beneath his army's boots. But even he could not silence the whispers. He gave Verlis everything: education, the best tutors, access to military strategies. But he could not change how others saw her. To them, she would always be broken. Verlis grew up in the shadow of warriors who looked at her with pity or disgust. She learned to move without drawing attention, to hide her pain behind a mask of indifference. But inside, she burned with rage. She was not weak. She had a mind sharper than any blade, a strategic mind that could outthink even the greatest generals. Yet, no one cared. When she reached the age of maturity, her father made a desperate attempt to secure her future. He announced that Verlis would take a mate, a warrior who would stand beside her and give her legitimacy. The suitors lined up, not for her, but for the power they would gain from marrying the High Warlord's daughter. But when they saw her, their expressions changed. Some laughed, others sneered. One of the greatest warriors of the Empire, General Kaler, stepped forward and spoke the words that sealed her fate. "No warrior will lower himself to mate with a cripple." Bahald erupted in cruel laughter. Verlis clenched her fists, her sharp claws digging into her palms. She wanted to fight back, to scream, to prove them wrong. But what could she do? She could not challenge them in combat. She was powerless. Her father, old and weary, finally gave in to the nobles' demands. "You have one cycle," he told her that night, his voice heavy with regret. "One cycle to find a mate. If no one claims you, you will be exiled." Verlis felt her heart turn to stone. She was Zkoran royalty, the daughter of the most feared warlord in the galaxy. And yet, she was nothing. Unwanted, weak, alone. Or so she thought. Because soon, a human would change everything. Verlis stood alone on the balcony of the royal palace, staring at the twin moons of Skor Prime. The cold wind bit against her skin, but she didn't move. Her father's words echoed in her mind. "One cycle. If no one claims you, you will be exiled." Exiled. The word felt heavier than a blade to the chest. To be exiled from Zkoran society was worse than death. It meant she would be sent to some distant, unimportant world, forgotten by history. No power, no home, no future. She would be erased. She clenched her fists, all because she was born different. The next day, the High Warlord's court was filled with warriors and nobles, all gathered to watch her humiliation. The ritual of the claiming had begun. It was a tradition where warriors would step forward and declare their intention to take a mate. For other royal daughters, this ceremony was filled with pride and competition. Warriors would fight for the honor of claiming a highborn mate. But for Verlis, there was only silence. She sat on the royal dais, her back straight despite the pain in her twisted spine. She would not let them see her weakness. Not today. Her father sat beside her, his face hard as stone. He was once the strongest warlord in the galaxy, but even he could not force warriors to take a mate they did not want. The royal herald stepped forward and raised his voice. "Who among the warriors of the Zkoran Empire will claim Princess Verlis as his mate?" Silence. The hall remained still. The nobles smirked. Some warriors looked away. Others muttered to each other, amusement in their eyes. Verlis felt her claws dig into the armrest of her throne. The herald tried again. Who among you will take the princess as your mate? Another moment of silence. Then, a voice rang out. No warrior will lower himself to mate with a cripple. The words came from General Kaler, the Empire's most feared champion. His voice was cold, his golden eyes filled with disdain. Laughter followed. The sound of it echoed through the great hall, burning into Verlis's mind. She forced herself to remain still. She would not show them how much it hurt. The High Warlord's jaw tightened. He stood and raised his hand for silence. If my daughter is not claimed by the end of the cycle, he declared, his voice heavy, then she will be exiled. The laughter stopped. The nobles had won. They had broken her father's will. Verlis rose from her throne, her face unreadable. Without a word, she turned and left the hall. She would not give them the satisfaction of seeing her pain. But inside, she was drowning in rage. She was not weak. She would find a way to survive. She would not let them win. She just didn't know how. Not yet. Verlis sat in the darkened chamber of her private quarters, staring at the glowing map of the Scoran Empire hovering above her table. Her mind raced with possibilities. How could she escape exile? There was no warrior willing to claim her, no way to fight back against the noble's judgment. Her time was running out. Then, a soft chime broke the silence. The palace doors were opening for a new guest. A human. Captain Eric Voss stepped into the grand halls of the Scoran Palace, his sharp blue eyes scanning the towering warriors surrounding him. He was the human ambassador, sent to negotiate new trade agreements with the Empire. But as he walked, he caught whispers of something else. A princess, crippled and unwanted, doomed to exile. His curiosity grew. Humans were a young species in the galaxy, often dismissed by warrior races like the Scorans. They were seen as physically weaker, but Eric knew something the Scorans did not. Humans never backed down from a challenge, and something about this unwanted princess intrigued him. At the evening banquet, Eric found himself seated near the High Warlord. Around them, warriors feasted on roasted meat and spiced ale. The air was thick with the scent of fire and metal. Across the hall, Verlis sat alone. She was different from the other Scoran females. Where they were broad-shouldered and fierce, she was lean, elegant, but with a fire in her golden eyes, a fire no one else seemed to see. Eric listened as the warriors around him mocked her. She is weak. She cannot even hold a blade. No true warrior would take her as a mate. Exile is a mercy. Eric leaned forward, his voice cutting through the laughter. If she is so weak, why do you all fear her? The table fell silent. The warriors turned to him, their eyes narrowing. Kaler, the general who had humiliated Verlis, sneered. A human would not understand. Strength is everything. Eric smirked. Then why are you all afraid to challenge her in a battle of the mind? Or are Scorans only good at swinging swords? Some warriors growled. Others looked unsure. Verlis, for the first time that night, lifted her gaze to him. Eric saw something there, a spark of hope. He stood up. His voice was clear, unwavering. I will do it. The hall froze. The High Warlord's eyes narrowed. Do what, human? Eric turned to Verlis, and, in front of the entire court, spoke the words that would shake the Empire. Princess Verlis, will you mate with me? The hall erupted. Warriors shouted in outrage. Nobles sneered. Kaler laughed in disbelief. But Verlis, for the first time in her life, she saw someone who did not look at her as broken. And against all odds, she answered, yes. Silence fell over the grand hall. For a moment, no one spoke. No one moved. The warriors, the nobles, even the High Warlord himself, all stared at Eric Voss, the human who had just proposed to Princess Verlis. Then the silence shattered. This is an insult, General Kaler roared, slamming his fist on the table. A human dares to claim a royal Scoran. A crippled one, no less. Laughter followed. Warriors sneered. Some shook their heads, amused at what they saw as a pathetic joke. Verlis remained still, But inside, her heart pounded. She had expected many things today. Humiliation, rejection, exile. But not this. A human proposing to her. Why? The High Warlord's deep voice cut through the noise. Human. His gaze locked onto Eric like a predator. Do you understand what you have done? Eric stood firm. I do. A flicker of amusement crossed the old warlord's face. And why should I allow this? Eric didn't hesitate. Because you gave her a choice. Nose Corin stepped forward. I did. The warriors snarled at his boldness, but Eric didn't flinch. He turned to Verlis. I do not see you as weak. His voice was steady. I see a mind sharper than any blade. I see a leader the Corins refuse to recognize. And if they are too blind to see your worth, then I will. Verlis's claws tightened against her palm. No one had ever spoken to her like that. No one had ever seen her like that. The High Warlord leaned back in his throne, his gaze thoughtful. Then he smirked. Very well. Gasps filled the hall. Even Verlis looked stunned. Kaler stepped forward, furious. You cannot be serious. A human. The warlord raised a hand, silencing him. The ritual of the claiming is ancient law. If the princess accepts, it is done. All eyes turned to Verlis. She could refuse. She could let the nobles win and face exile. Or she could take the risk, take the unknown path, and stand beside this strange, bold human. Her choice was clear. She lifted her chin and spoke, her voice unwavering. I accept. The hall erupted again, this time in outrage. Warriors slammed their fists against tables. Nobles shouted protests. But the decision had been made. Verlis rose from her seat. Eric stepped forward. For the first time in her life, she did not feel alone. As their hands touched in the ceremonial gesture of agreement, she whispered, You are either the bravest or the most foolish being in this empire, human. Eric smirked. Why not both? The war had just begun. The moment Verlis and Eric's hands touched, the palace erupted into chaos. Warriors slammed their fists on the table. Nobles shouted in outrage, and General Kaler's face twisted with fury. This is a disgrace, he bellowed. A human cannot claim as Corin princess. He is weak, unworthy. Eric remained calm, his grip on Verlis's hand firm. Then fight me. The hall fell silent. Kaler's eyes narrowed. You dare challenge me. You claim I am weak, Eric said, his voice steady. Prove it. The warriors grinned, sensing blood. A fight between a human and the Empire's strongest general. It would be a massacre. Verlis's heart pounded. Eric was strong for a human, but Kaler was a monster in battle. She leaned in, whispering fiercely. You do not have to do this. They will not honor a duel against a human. Eric smirked. I know. That's why I challenged him in front of the entire court. If he refuses, he loses face. Verlis's eyes widened. Clever. The High Warlord, watching with interest, spoke. Kaler, will you accept? Kaler's jaw clenched. He was trapped. Refusing meant admitting he saw Eric as too weak to fight. His pride would never allow that. I accept, he growled. The warriors cheered. Blood would spill tonight. The duel begins. The combat arena was filled with Corins eager to watch the human's death. The sky burned red with the setting sun as Eric and Kaler stepped into the dueling circle. Kaler towered over Eric, his muscles rippling beneath his armor. He wielded a massive Corin warblade, its edges glowing with energy. Eric had nothing but a simple combat knife. Verlis stood at the edge of the circle, her claws digging into her palms. This was madness. A warrior slammed a drum. The duel began. Kaler lunged, swinging his massive blade in a deadly arc. Eric dodged, barely avoiding the strike. The ground shattered where the blade struck. The crowd laughed. The human is running. But Eric wasn't running. He was watching, studying. Kaler attacked again, fast and brutal. Eric sidestepped, rolling away at the last moment. Kaler's attacks were powerful but predictable. Eric grinned. "You swing like a drunken beast." Kaler snarled and rushed forward. This time, Eric didn't dodge. He moved in. At the last second, he ducked beneath Kaler's swing and slashed his knife across the general's side. Blood splattered the sand. The crowd gasped. Kaler staggered back, his eyes wide. He hadn't expected the human to land a hit. Eric twirled the knife in his hand. "Looks like your weakness is your pride." Verlis couldn't believe it. For the first time in her life, she saw something impossible. A human standing victorious against a Zkoran warrior. The crowd stared in shock. Blood dripped from Kaler's side, staining the sand beneath his feet. No one had expected this, a human landing a strike on Zkor-Prime's strongest general. Kaler's face twisted in rage. He pressed a hand to his wound, his golden eyes burning with fury. "You dare wound me?" Eric twirled his knife, smirking. "I did more than dare. I succeeded." The crowd gasped at his boldness. Was this human insane? Kaler let out a furious roar. He charged. This time, his attacks were faster, more precise. His warblade became a blur of deadly arcs. Eric dodged, barely escaping each strike. He was quick, but he knew he couldn't keep this up forever. One mistake, and he would be dead. Verlis watched, her claws digging into her palms. She had never seen a human fight before. Their species was supposed to be weaker, slower, inferior, but Eric was proving them wrong. He was surviving. And more than that, he was thinking. Eric knew he couldn't overpower Kaler, but he didn't need to. He just needed to make him reckless. "You're strong," Eric taunted, dodging another swing. "But brute strength won't win this fight." Kaler growled. "I am Zkoran. You are nothing but a fragile ape." Eric grinned. "Then why are you the one bleeding?" Kaler's rage exploded. He raised his warblade high, preparing for a final brutal strike. This was his mistake. The moment Kaler's arms lifted, Eric moved. In a blur of motion, Eric dived low, sliding beneath Kaler's reach. With deadly precision, he slammed his knife into Kaler's knee. Kaler roared in agony, stumbling forward as his leg gave out. The mighty warrior collapsed to one knee. The arena fell silent. Eric stood over the fallen general, his knife still in hand. He breathed hard, his muscles burning, but he had done it. He had won. The aftermath. No one spoke. The warriors, the nobles, even the High Warlord, all stared at Eric in disbelief. A human had defeated a Zkoran general. It was unthinkable. Kaler clutched his wounded knee, his face twisted in pain and humiliation. He had lost. Eric wiped the sweat from his brow. "I believe that settles it." The High Warlord's deep voice rumbled through the arena. "Indeed, it does." He stood, his gaze locked on Eric. There was something new in his eyes. Not just surprise, but respect. "You have proven your worth, human." His voice carried across the silent crowd. The clanging stands. "Verlis is yours." Gasps filled the air. Some warriors looked furious, others uncertain. But no one dared challenge the warlord's word. Verlis stepped forward, stopping beside Eric. For the first time in her life, she was not seen as weak. And for the first time, she looked at Eric and thought, maybe he was more than just her way out. Maybe he was something more. The arena still echoed with shock. A human had defeated General Kaler. The warriors of Zkor-Prime, who once mocked Eric, now looked at him with a mix of respect and resentment. Verlis stood beside Eric, her golden eyes unreadable. She had expected him to survive, but not to win. The High Warlord stepped forward, his gaze locked onto Eric. "You have proven your strength, human. But mating with a Zkoran princess is more than just a fight. Are you ready for what comes next?" Eric wiped blood from his arm, smirking. "I didn't come here looking for a fight, but I sure as hell won't back down from what I've started." The warlord's expression remained unreadable. Then he did something no one expected. He laughed. A deep, rumbling laugh that silenced the whispers of the warriors. Perhaps the humans are not as weak as we thought. Verlis narrowed her eyes. Her father was unpredictable, but this was something new. Did he truly accept Eric, or was he planning something? The warlord turned to his daughter. Verlis, do you accept this mating bond? She had already said yes in the Grand Hall, but this time was different. She looked at Eric. He had risked everything for her, even when he didn't have to. For the first time, she was not being discarded. Someone had chosen her. Her voice was steady. I accept. A hush fell over the warriors. It was done. The claiming was sealed. But Eric wasn't finished yet. I have one more condition, he said. Gasps echoed through the arena. A human making demands. Unthinkable. The High Warlord's gaze darkened. You dare ask for more? Eric didn't back down. Verlis is your daughter, a princess of this empire, but you were ready to throw her away. That won't happen anymore. If I take her as my mate, she will not be exiled. She will stand beside me, with the respect she deserves. Verlis's heart stopped. No one had ever fought for her like this. No one had ever demanded she be treated as worthy. The warlord's eyes burned into Eric's, searching for weakness. But the human didn't flinch. Finally, after a long silence, the warlord spoke. Very well. If you want her to be seen as worthy, then prove it. Verlis tensed. Another test. The warlord smirked. The Zikoran Empire is built on conquest and strength. If you wish to keep your claim, then you must lead a battle. A human, leading Zikoran warriors. That will be your true test. A murmur ran through the crowd. It was madness. No human had ever commanded a Zikoran army. But Eric only grinned. Name the battle, and I'll win it. Verlis stared at him. This human was either a fool or a legend in the making. You said. The war drums echoed across the canyon. Eric stood at the edge of the battlefield, watching as hundreds of Zikoran warriors prepared for war. They were a fearsome sight, tall, armored, and bloodthirsty. But today, they followed him. He still couldn't believe it. A human, commanding Zikoran warriors. It was unheard of. Yet the High Warlord had given him no choice. Lead a successful battle, or lose everything. Verlis stood beside him, her sharp eyes scanning the warriors. They do not trust you. Eric smirked. I don't need them to trust me. I need them to follow orders. She studied him for a moment, then nodded, then lead. The enemy was a group of rebels, Zikorans who had refused the Empire's rule and had taken control of a key mining outpost. The High Warlord wanted them crushed. Eric had one advantage. The Zikorans believed in brute force, but Eric, he believed in strategy. The battle begins. The Zikoran warriors rushed forward, roaring as they charged the rebel stronghold. The rebels fired plasma bolts from behind their barricades. Warriors fell, but they kept pushing. Eric, however, did not charge with them. Instead, he and a small squad flanked left, using the rocky terrain as cover. Verlis followed, keeping pace. You fight like a human. Eric grinned. That's the idea. While the main army distracted the rebels, Eric's team reached the supply depot behind the enemy lines. Explosives in hand, Eric planted the charges. A minute later, the depot exploded. Flames erupted. The rebels, caught off guard, turned in confusion, just as the main Zikoran force stormed through their weakened defenses. Within minutes, the battle was over. The rebels surrendered. Victory was Eric's. The aftermath. The warriors gathered in the war camp, staring at Eric in silence. He had done the impossible. He had won, not through brute strength, but through intelligence. General Kaler, still limping from their duel, growled, You fight like a coward. Eric smirked. I fight to win. Some warriors laughed. Others nodded in respect. The High Warlord stood, watching him. After a long silence, he finally spoke. You are not Zikoran, but today You have earned something greater than victory. You have earned respect." A murmur ran through the warriors. Even Kaler did not argue. Verlis stepped closer, looking at Eric in a new way. He was no longer just a human. He was her mate. And together, they had just changed the Empire forever. The campfires burned bright in the war camp. Warriors feasted and drank, celebrating their victory. Eric sat near the edge of the camp, sharpening his knife, his mind still restless. He had won the battle. He had gained respect, but he knew it wasn't over. Verlis sat beside him, watching him carefully. "You are thinking too much." Eric smirked. "It's a bad habit." She leaned forward, her golden eyes sharp. "You proved yourself today. Even my father respects you now. Why do you still look uneasy?" Eric sighed, gazing at the stars. "Because I know how power works." Verlis frowned. "What do you mean?" He gestured to the warriors around them. "They respect me today. But tomorrow, they will wonder if a human should really stand beside a princess of the Empire." Asterisk, 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 asterisk. Verlis's expression hardened. "Let them wonder. You earned your place." Eric chuckled. "Respect can be won in battle, but loyalty, that takes more." Before Verlis could respond, a messenger arrived. The warrior knelt before them, his breath ragged. "The High Warlord summons you." Eric and Verlis exchanged glances. Something was wrong. A dangerous proposal. Inside the warlord's tent, the air was heavy with tension. The High Warlord stood over a holographic map, his face unreadable. Eric and Verlis entered, standing before him. The warlord's golden eyes studied Eric. "You have proven yourself in battle. Now I will see if you are truly worthy of my daughter." Eric folded his arms. "I thought I already did that." The warlord smirked. "Winning a battle is one thing. Ruling beside a princess, that is another." Verlis stiffened. "Father, what are you planning?" The warlord turned back to the map, activating a red-marked zone. "There is one final test. A greater battle awaits. If you truly want Verlis, you must lead the Empire's warriors into the heart of enemy territory." Eric's eyes narrowed. "And if I refuse?" The warlord's gaze darkened. "Then you will be seen as weak. The warriors will turn against you. And Verlis," he looked at his daughter, "she will never be truly safe in this empire." Verlis's claws clenched into fists. "You cannot do this." But Eric held up a hand, stopping her. He already knew the answer. He met the warlord's stare, his voice calm. "Then I'll lead the battle." The warlord nodded. "Good. Prepare yourself, human. This war will decide everything." As Eric and Verlis left the tent, she grabbed his arm, her voice tense. "You don't have to do this." Eric smiled. "Yes, I do. Because after this, there will be no doubts left." Verlis looked at him, realizing something. This wasn't just about proving himself anymore. Eric was fighting for both of them.